Welcome to the mental space. Now, sometimes I will intro my guests from the top of my mind, but these guys' experience is so diverse that I'm going to have to read off a sheet and talk about having imposter syndrome. How about this? My first guest is Mr. Mark Hannaford. Now, his profession is listed as adventurer, pioneer, entrepreneur, founder, leader, innovator, and he is the founder of World Extreme Medicine. He has established a global network focused on delivering training, medical training, and expertise in extreme environments. My second guest, Nikki McLeary, again, talk about this for profession, adventure scientist with a focus on human performance scientist. She is a leadership and resilience expert. She translates expedition experiences into empowering talks focusing on leadership. And she is also the science lead for World Extreme Medicine. Mark, Nikki, welcome to the mental space.
Thank you very much.
Crikey.
Good morning.
It's kind of like meeting Indiana Jones times 2 here. Firstly, give our audience a little bit of understanding if we can. You founded World Extreme Medicine. Tell me about that. How long has that been going? And actually, what is the work that you do?
Thank you. We've been going for about 20 years, and it sprang out of my work as an expedition leader. I realized on the type of expeditions that I was leading, that we were taking clients to risky places, and I wanted to ensure that we brought them back safely. So we employed medics to do that. And brought medics along, but we quickly realised those medical professionals, who were generally doctors at that point, needed to be trained for our environment. So we started doing internal training, and our medical community, which grew up, behind those expeditions, they insisted that we do a publicly facing course because there were so many of their colleagues and friends that also wanted to do it, and also their colleagues and friends who were paramedics and nurses wanted to get involved, but we simply didn't have the capacity within our expedition company. So about 22 years ago, we ran our first publicly accessible course in the UK, and 70 doctors turned up, which took us back, but made us realise, one, we really enjoyed teaching these people. Two, there was a significant societal benefit to training medics like this to be adaptable and to learn left field thinking, to teach them clinical skills that were useful in remote areas and low resource environments. And three, it was sustainable. There was something there. So we started with our first course, and now we sit here, and I've just come back from running the world's largest subject matter conference. We run that in Scotland. It's called the World Extreme Medicine Conference. And we had, for example, J.D. Polk, the medical director of NASA. We had astronaut Carl Lundgren. We had, war surgeons, humanitarian nurses. We had special forces medics. We had the whole gamut of that medical community because we want to break down silos and share knowledge. As you'll probably appreciate, there's so much knowledge held by military medics that is so useful in a humanitarian setting. So we wanted to break those silos down. And the conference, we don't have uniforms. Nobody has titles. It's a sort of flat hierarchy. One, to allow the nascent young aspiring medics, so there's no kind of uphill gradient where they feel there's a barrier to talking to the thought leaders. And it's not dissimilarly also for the thought leaders. They're there to share their knowledge and experience with absolutely everybody that's there. So, and in the past we've had Jane Goodall speak. We've had the film director, actor Tom Cruise speak. So it does attract a
I've heard of him.
He's what's he been in?
He's been to Dubai a couple of times.
He has been to Dubai a couple of times. In fact, I managed to get, and your mission, should you choose to accept it, into my opening speech this year. So it's a really eclectic gathering. It's about medicine. The aims of everybody there is to make medicine better in remote spaces, low resource environments, regardless of their day job.
I'm going to try and not crack a joke about the UK. You've held this conference being a low resource environment, which is quite extreme right now. Give us an example, though, of when we talk about extreme locations, like where are we talking about? Where around the world have you been? Where in the world have you been taking medicine into places and operating?
I guess in terms of the faculty of World Extreme Medicine, they've literally been everywhere, but they've also been into space. There were quite a lot of the faculty. I go to NASA for a rocket launch in February with a faculty member, a colleague, Dr. Mike Barrett, who goes up to the International Space Station, I think, for his third mission.
Okay.
And then over to the astronaut office for a meeting with the team there. So literally anywhere, but it's worth highlighting. A low resource environment might not just be space, or it might not just be the deserts of Oman or here or whatever. It can be on the street.
Yeah.
If medical help doesn't get to you quickly, and you're a medic or you're in a position to help, having no tools and equipment puts you in a low resource environment. So it's translatable to every day, and it's translatable to our hospitals. The stuff that the skills that people learn undertaking this type of training is so useful in hospital environments in terms of, learning good leadership, but also good fellowship, thinking outside of the box, thinking of alternative ways of doing, addressing problems, and looking at stuff from a left field to allow innovation and new ideas to spring forth.
I'm going to come back to that. Nikki, I just want to bring you in because I'm fascinated when you talk about human performance science as well. So can you give our audience just a little bit of a definition of what human performance science is? What do you do as a human performance scientist?
I always say I'm a human performance scientist, and everyone says, great, what is that?
Yeah.
It's basically mechanisms to get the best out of people, or rather to help them to get the best out of themselves. So Mark picked up really nicely about healthcare settings and how extreme medicine not only helps with the technical side of development for doctors, nurses and paramedics, but also the non-technical side, all those nice skill sets that help us have a better, independent, productive life.
Tell me a little bit more. Give me an example of what that actually looks like.
Well, I'll give you a really good example.
Yeah.
So we've set up something in the UAE called the expedition method.
Okay.
And the idea is we take lessons from the wild and we bring them back into traditional workspaces. So when we're operational in deserts or mountains or oceans, we're very focused on communication, complex problem solving, strategic thinking, those sort of core skill sets. And the idea is, some of what we're doing here is to bring those mechanisms into educational settings, healthcare institutes, corporate companies, to benefit bigger populations.
I mean, that's something that fascinates me with the work that you're doing. What have you learned? Well, again, give us some geographical examples of challenging places that you've been, but also in those challenging times, what have they taught you, out there in the wild, shall we say, that can be useful inside, the jungle of the boardroom?
It's there are life lessons that you learn along the way, and I think from the outside, expeditions and responding to humanitarian and natural disasters, to be quite frank, if you look at the footage in the film, it can look quite glamorous. The reality is a lot different. As often as not, you're sleep deprived, you're hungry, your backache, your knees ache. You're wet, you're cold, you have bits that are beginning to freeze off you have bits that are beginning to rot off you because you're in the jungle. So, the lessons are every day, and getting behind the kind of Instagram photograph is important, and it's part of what sort of Nikki and I are here to teach and share. There are a couple of things that stick with me, and I've got a couple of mantras that I use, especially with my team as we sort of expand our operation, is bridges, not rivers. So rather than thinking of obstacles, think of ways around them. The other bit, and it kind of goes back to that Nelson Mandela quote, that actually everything seems impossible until it's done. Mm-hmm. So it's breaking everything down into small, manageable chunks. For me, it's about building an eclectic team around me, because there are things that I'm really good at, but there are things that I'm really poor at. So I build teams around me where those skills are complementary. The underlying bit about building those teams is, for me, is respect and being able to get on with those people. They might be very, very different characters, but they're there for a particular reason. And with that reason comes respect, because they can do something that you can't do. Yeah. And I've found in building my teams and building teams in really different environments, like in the deserts of Namibia, or building essentially corporate teams to build my conference. The lessons are the same. You need that mutual respect between people, but you also, and as a leader, you're the person that engenders that. You're the person that's the catalyst for that, and kind of the exemplar. You need, through your actions, to show respect to all of the members of your team, because you built that team, And by doing so, you find that people mimic your behavior, or they begin to understand why you've chosen these eclectic characters, these different characters to be in your team. And when you're on an expedition, that's expeditions generally by definition are physical. So, the mutual respect also comes from achieving stuff together and building those successful teams. And you find there's a very classic model. You have a team that sort of, squabbles and fights as they kind of, they're learning from you right at the beginning, but then they start to get fractures, go through their teenage years. But when they start forming and performing, start actually delivering on what they've been set up to do, those can be some of the most remarkable teams you're ever going to work with, because you're feeding off your own success. Equally, when stuff goes wrong, you've got a team there that's not going to panic, because stuff does go wrong and you have to change your plan, you have to stay flexible. And having that mutual respect between team members allows that mobility to change direction, or to overcome or circumvent an obstacle that's in your way. But certainly, that Nelson Mandela quote is a great way to start, in so much as, everything seems impossible until you just start breaking it down to small parts, start digging into it, and gather people around you who can do stuff better than you can do yourself.
Fascinating you mentioned Nelson Mandela. I think the conversation around, he was hailed as a great leader. And the conversation about what makes great leaders these days is obviously evolving. We used to have, a chief executive officer that was just about delivering the bottom line, the P&L, whatever. And now we've got the conversation about the chief empathy officer, the chief inspiration officer. Nikki, in your work, I wanted to ask you, how have you seen leadership change? B, what are you teaching them? And C, what's the responsibility? Because obviously we talk about mental health a lot, and we've just had the Mental Awards 2023, which was to recognize the work of corporates and individuals that are trying to prioritize the mental health of the people around them. How important is it for leadership to actually recognize that they can have a tremendous impact on the mental health of their team?
It's hugely important, isn't it? Because if we think about it, employee wellness is connected to business continuity and the bottom line. We're interested in keeping people safe and well, but from a pragmatic perspective as a business leader, you have to also be interested in your bottom line. So the ideal scenario is that you can address both at the same time to benefit everybody. So I think it's hugely important from a business perspective that business leaders understand that having a happy workforce is to have a productive workforce. And I'm not necessarily talking about yoga and cupcakes in the workplace. It's practical things that evidence says businesses need to do. They need to have that open communication. They need to have the conversations about wages and bonuses. They need to keep the workforce content with flexi time. It's a changing world. The younger generation coming into the workforce, they're probably not quite accepting as we are, our generation, of the leadership of the past.
Yeah.
So things do have to change if you want to retain your best people. Otherwise, you will just lose them to companies that are a little bit forward-thinking.
I wanted to come back on that as well, because you talk about open communication. And we've had great guests on the podcast previously that talked about psychological safety inside of teams. A great friend of mine, and Andy Fieldhouse, talked about it. When you are setting up teams in some of the the most, again, challenging, remote, resource poor locations around the world, how do you, and you say you've got eclectic people, how do you ensure that? How do you create that open conversation? How do you create that culture of communication?
Practically by being open yourself. It's quite often there's not, and it's in business, but certainly is true in expeditions. Leadership, being the leader, can be quite a lonely position. So you need to address that by being very open with your team and listening to their suggestions. They also need to respect when you say, no, that's not the way it's going to happen, because often because of your experience. You might have more insight. You've been down that road before, but you know that it doesn't work. Or your eventual aim, whilst unarticulated and perhaps slightly nebulous in your mind, a plan might distract from where your gut feeling says you need to head. But delivering that no message is an important step. That needs to be done with respect for everybody else's input. I also learned early on that I'm being creative and a kind of big picture person. I don't do detail well, but members of my team will need to have that detail. So I've learned to kind of coach myself, one, to deliver more detail so that they can understand what the plan is, but two, also not to get irritated when they ask me questions that I think, why do you need to know that? Realize actually they do need to know that because that's the way their mind works.
Yeah.
So it's making sure that when you're delivering briefing, training people, that actually you take into account the way that they need information to be delivered.
Okay.
Equally, they come to a point of realization that you need information delivered in a certain way, and for them to give, for my team to give me 10 pages of a report just doesn't work. So, that relationship matures, but you then, you respect each other's needs. In an expedition environment, we always have an end of day debrief with what's gone on. And that at times can be, can take some time, especially if we're working with groups and we've got clients with us. That can take, quite a while, so that we're planning for the next day. But is making sure that everybody's happy in their position, any concerns are talked about and thrashed out. And given the experience of members of the team, the newer members learn from their experiences and are kind of guided through some of the pitfalls and things that can trip them up. And it's always backing your team up, so they know that they're not going to be isolated, hung out to dry. They're not going to be ridiculed or anything else. That you've got their back, and then you'll back them up. But if people don't work in that team, then you also have to be tough. They need to be moved on.
Nikki, I'm going to just ask you to kind of continue from that as well, because I can see you
going
nodding
to.
away, you're really champing at the bit to carry on. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think what Mark says in an expedition environment, it just translates so nicely into business. But I think there's a barrier between what we do and businesses understanding they can cherry pick those lessons for the greater benefit. So, for example, the briefing, really good. Every morning you just sit down with the whole team and you go through everything. It's an ideal opportunity for someone to say, oh, actually, this happened yesterday. Do you know about it? Well, no, I don't, but I do need to, so thank you. Alongside that, at the end of the day, debriefing. What went well that day? What could we have done better? Was anyone unhappy? Why? Also, throughout the day, just having an open door policy, even at a set time of the day, that you put that hour aside, that any employees can come to you within your team and talk to you about anything they want to. It's just putting those mechanisms in place that start to cultivate that open communication environment that we perhaps take for granted because we're used to it, but businesses perhaps find difficult to implement because it's literally a culture change within their business.
I'm going to take things back a step, quite a big step actually. It's possible that you were both these enlightened human beings all of your life since you were a kid. If that's not the case, what's your journey been to forming these views? How have you come about, why did you get into this field? Because it's, World Extreme Medicine. It's like, what attracted you? What called you to this mission in the first place?
That's quite an interesting question, and I would say I'm not quite sure, but I absolutely love what I do.
Yeah.
And know that we are indirectly through our faculty and the people we're training saving lives. Now, the reason I wanted to do what I did was the expedition bit. When I was at school, I never realised you could make a living leading expeditions. It was like it was an impossibility. I thought those, the days of Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta were past. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when I found out from a friend that he'd got a job working as a guide, it was like, what I can do that. And so I started, my first expedition was 6 months in Patagonia, rowing down the coast of of Chile in an open fishing boat to a glacier we then went to climb on. And then after that, got a job as a guide in Morocco. And I worked across the sort of Middle East, in Jordan, Syria, in the Yemen, and then got a job eventually. Got a part-time job with National Geographic Adventures, and started driving boats in Kamchatka, of all places. So it was that desire to travel, and I think that's probably built into my DNA. My father was a sea captain, so in fact, my uncle was a sea captain, everybody was sea captains. So that was kind of built into my DNA, and coming from Devon in England, there's a huge heritage of seafaring. What led me on to doing the expedition medicine, the extreme medicine bit, was actually a really strong desire to make sure that the people who I led on expeditions, I brought them all back. I felt as a leader that I was responsible for their safety, not only their physical safety, but also their mental health. So making sure that there was, as much as I could, that those risks were mitigated. Adventure by its definition has risk. But what I wanted to ensure that we never came home from an expedition saying to ourselves, if only we'd had a decent medic, that person would still be alive. We always had a medic with us when we ran our trips, and there were occasions when they were absolutely essentially needed, and that individual probably wouldn't have made it home, but having a well-trained medic there with medical kit ensured that they did.
You talked about the mental health of the people on your expeditions. When we look at the suicide statistics around anybody working in frontline care, they are significant compared to other industries. Though, obviously with mental health, we're all struggling. Where have you been, or can you tell me about a time when you've seen that challenged, either within yourself or within your teams? What was it that you were seeing, and how did you kind of cope with that, or how did you help or support with that?
Well, I guess I'm not going to answer that question, but I am going to answer it. I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way, if that makes sense. So mental health in frontline workers and clinicians and staff, yes, is extremely poor. What we found on a number of occasions over the years, both when we were doing expeditions, but increasingly as we started doing, as extreme medicine has grown and grown, is that people enter medicine because they care about other people. And they want to provide the best medicine, the best help that they can possibly do. But the modern healthcare system and the pressures on that, and it's not restricted just to the UK, obviously, this is a global problem, mean that they're actually quite often quite distant from that passion, the reason why they did medicine in the first place. What we found increasingly is that extreme medicine reconnects them with the medicine they thought they were going to do. And what we're increasingly finding, because we don't want good medics to leave medicine and go to other areas, we want them to stay in medicine. That's good for all of us. Keeping them in medicine, helping them to stay in medicine. Extreme medicine, for those people that want to engage with it, provides a really, really useful balance. That's kind of an escape valve, but it also reconnects them, this is what we're hearing, with the medicine they thought they were going to be practicing. Because it's very personal. You're helping an individual or a group of people. It's an interaction between you and those people without any barriers or filters. It also, it's outside of the hospital. You have to think on your feet. You have to work in teams. And our teams tend to be highly dynamic, highly adventurous. They're a number of medics that call it kind of the front end of medicine, where it's exciting. So there's that reconnection. So whilst I wouldn't make any too big a claims, but we know that we've kept important medics that we would like to be treated by. If we have an accident, we've kept them in medicine by them engaging in extreme medicine in all of its various forms, whether it's humanitarian disaster, expedition, extreme sports. So it's a positive.
How do you, and I'm going to address this question to Nikki, how does, because I totally get what you're saying there, and often people get swallowed up by the bureaucracy. So it's not the love of the job get swallowed up by the bureaucracy. How do companies, how do corporates, again, if you talk about the expedition experience, like how do you keep that magic alive inside a corporate?
That's a good question, isn't it? I suppose it's injecting something exciting into the everyday and injecting that something that's going to work into the everyday. And it goes back to how do you empower your employees to be well? The huge advantage that we have going on expeditions, working in extreme sports, working in extreme medicines, is a lot of it takes place in an outdoor environment. And there's decades and decades and decades of research that tells us operating in an outdoor space is good for our mental well-being. So if we're talking about this physical space and office, what can we do? We can look at evidence and we can have that guide us. So that's what I do as a scientist. I always turn to the evidence. Plants in the workplace. You think, plants, that's not going to make any difference. One plant, no, it's not going to make any difference. But a few plants and something else, and an outdoor view where you can see a river.
Natural light. A certain temperature. I mean, this is a performance environment. You're cultivating a performance environment much the same as you would for an athlete, but for your workplace. So if you want to get the best out of your employees, you need to treat them like an athlete. You wouldn't give athletes old well water and a stale bit of bread. You make sure they've got good nutrition, they sleep well, they're surrounded and immersed in a performance environment. They have time outdoors, they get their fitness. So there's a whole load of mechanisms you can do as a business. Even if it's saying to your employees, take 3 15-minute breaks a day and go for a walk. That's evidence to improve not only your fitness, increase your steps, but also your psychological well-being. And just complete the equation for me on that one, because sometimes I don't think leaders look at that and they'll go, well, yeah, but that's 45 minutes that they're not working. Actually, what are the productivity gains that companies get from embracing this?
Well, again, that's easy. They can get their legal firm or an intern to go and look at the evidence, and quite clearly it says throughout all of these academic journals the amount of money companies lose per year by not looking after their employees. Sickness alone.
Yeah.
Sickness through mental health is huge. I mean, that is your bottom line.
I think from my own personal experience of running my company and my team, we don't typically count hours, so we remain really flexible. So that people are able to do the school run, pick up their kids.
Yeah.
So that they're able to go to, say, a doctor's appointment during the week when it's actually convenient, where they can leave early to do the shopping. So remaining flexible, and it's a two-way relationship, isn't it, in terms of respect. So I know that my team will make up the hours when they need to, and when it's extremely busy, put in extra hours. But on the other hand, all companies have ups and downs in terms of, activities. So during quiet periods, we're quite relaxed about people, leaving early and stuff, because we know at the end of the day, everybody's going to make it up. So, and I know that becomes more difficult with bigger teams, but it's about trust.
Yeah.
And building up that trust and communication, I think it's my own personal experience, worked really, really well.
I wanted to pick up on something that you both talked about earlier, and we talked about the younger generation, the Gen Z, which will make a lot of people of our age, Gen X, not boomers, Gen X, roll their eyes and go, oh, they're so entitled and that sort of thing. And you did say earlier that they're less prepared to actually tolerate some of the old, outdated management practices, the things that we will, people of our generation put up with. What's from your perspective, what's the secret sauce in trying to connect the leadership is now to that younger generation? Because companies need to attract talent, they need to keep that talent, they need to develop that talent. And we know that Gen Z will literally go, well, sorry, but if you're not looking after my mental health, we're out, we're off, we'll go and find another opportunity. So I just maybe get your thought on how you bridge that, coming back to bridges, how do you bridge that generational gap, that outdated thinking to modern day thinking, because we say that things have changed.
Well, I think trying to squeeze a square peg in a round hole is never going to work. So it is a case, in order to attract the best talent, to be flexible in your outlook. I think also flattening hierarchies, certainly in my experience, works well, because you want these bright minds to have the freedom to experiment and to try stuff. And you need to empower them to do so. And flattening the hierarchy means that there's less loops for them to jump through in order to be innovative. And I think that's quite important. That comes with trust, of course. You've got to make sure that they're capable of innovating and not losing you money at the same time.
Yeah.
So there is a balance there, but that's then the job of a good leader, to facilitate that. And in some respects, you're using the experience that you've had, and certainly there are pathways you've gone down aren't going to work. You don't want people to make the same mistake. You do want people to pull back from that. So you need to put controls in. But to my mind, they start off reasonably firm when people start with you, and soften quite quickly once you get to know that actually you've employed them for a particular reason, because they're bright, intelligent, and adaptable. And they work in the modern world as it is now, not the world that we started off in.
I find that one fascinating as well. This is a conversation I've had a couple of times, and I know, Nikki, you were working recently with a group of young leaders, but almost like the atmosphere, the environment that think of our kids who are coming out of university and going into the world of work. Like when we started in the world of work, there was no email, there was no internet, there was no WhatsApp, there was no social media, there was no comparison. There were a lot of factors, like the pace that our kids have actually got to like just leap into this very fast flowing river. What do you think of all of that for, how do you teach young leaders not to get swept away by all of that?
It's about training your non-technical skills. So we're talking about senior leaders who haven't lost their way. They're very good leaders, but they're up against a dynamic world, a changing world, where this younger generation who haven't got strong non-technical skills, and we know that because that's what the evidence tells us, are jumping in this fast-flowing river and getting swept away, where the leaders are trying to swim against the tide, and it all feels a bit muddled. I would say to the leaders, as well as the universities that are producing the young graduates, you have to target development of your skill sets. You have to go on, you do have to go on courses, structured courses, evidence-based courses. You need to find ways to target your resilience, to target your communication, to target the complex problem solving. It doesn't just happen. 30, 40 years of operating outdoors, we're fortunate. The outdoor environments are hugely evidenced to provide these skill sets. But you need to find ways, such as, a medic might use extreme medicine, whereas a university might use the expedition method to start targeting these skill sets, but targeting them actively. We've talked about this for so long.
It fascinates me. There's one phrase I really, really hate. You've just used the term non-technical skills. I hate it when people talk about soft skills, because they don't seem to be soft anymore. They seem to be absolutely essential skills.
They're crucial skills.
It's when I'm looking for a confident speaker. In the perfect world, I want the authority in what they're talking about, and I want them to be a great communicator. Now, often those two don't go together. But if I want to get something across about a particular topic, I'll bring on board somebody who might not be the world leader, but is a great communicator. That non-technical skill of putting across complex ideas so that other people can understand them and come along. So it is an essential package. You've got to be effective, both as a leader, but also to have your team, operating at really high pace. They need their non-technical skills because they have to work with each other. And they also need to learn to be potentially good followers. They will be the leaders of the future. But at some stage, they've also got to follow. Learning all that doesn't come naturally to all people at the beginning of their career. And they're essential skills. Learn them early, then they've got them for the rest of their career. learn them midway, then they've missed some of the potential they had earlier on by not having that development.
You talked earlier a little bit about some personal mantras. 20, 30 years, again, extreme adventures, some intense situations in difficult parts of the world, low resource centres. What are the hardest lessons you've learned out there? And I'm going to start with Nikki.
That's a good question. I think one of the nicest lessons I've learned is that even at the lowest times when you're with people that you have to lead, having that responsibility almost pushes you through by default. It empowers you knowing that you've got that responsibility. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. So you might be cold, wet, hungry, upset, not quite sure where the direction you're going because it's a blizzard. But if you've got 10 people with you who are relying on you to get them back safely, I think that's a huge motivator.
Mark?
Probably two things. Working out, one of the best jobs I ever did was a job I really didn't like, but I felt I should, because that's what my peers told me I should be doing, and that's what society pointed me towards. In doing it, I realised it just wasn't for me. And by doing that made me realise what I did really enjoy, and I should be doing what I enjoyed because I was far more productive. The other bit, and it was quite a hard lesson, especially when I was younger, was that I wasn't always right. That actually getting different inputs and, that eclectic team, the quiet data analyst type person who, is at the other end of the personality spectrum to me, would have analysed some situations far better than I was, and I needed to listen to what they were saying rather than going sort of all full steam, full steam ahead. So realising you're not always right is probably the biggest lesson. And I don't know whether Nikki would still agree with that, but realising, listen to other people. There are times when you need to lead, but getting input before you jump is a good thing.
I think you touched upon a quite profound question there, which I think is asked by a lot of people right now, particularly, when we've come off the back of COVID, the pandemic made many of us reconnect. If we talk about purpose, how important is it to be living your values to each of you and to be doing something of purpose? You say, you tried a job because you thought you should, or, how many people are in the job because it pays the wage, but what's the damage that's doing to them purely because they're not living their purpose? So how important or profound do you think purpose is to each of you?
Well, I think in the way that you've asked the question, you're already answering it, isn't it? It's absolutely and fundamentally central to everything that I do. And I've worked hard to get to this point, but it's not always easy. And that's, we talk about luck, but actually you make your own luck. But I feel very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. But it's that sense of purpose, which means that I can't imagine not ever doing what I'm doing. I can't imagine retirement. I can't imagine stopping. And we look at figures like that. Certainly, in our society, people like Jane Goodall, who is next year celebrating her 90th birthday, and her travel schedule is more hectic than anybody else I know. People like Attenborough who stay, whose purpose is fundamental and core. It is who they are. It's their brand, if you like. So I would aspire in that direction.
Okay.
And that's how my mind works.
Nikki?
Not dissimilar. I mean, I've always been fortunate to be able to do what I've wanted to do work-wise.
Yeah.
And I haven't pigeonholed myself in. But I do think it's really unhelpful when you hear people say, just quit your job. If you don't like it, quit it. I mean, you have to be pragmatic in life. People sometimes don't have the luxury of following their heart and their purpose.
Yeah.
So again, I think it is finding those mechanisms that you can inject into your daily life that, does keep your head above water for as long as you have to.
You've literally just gone where I wanted to go with my next question, which is, sometimes we can't all be living our own, our purpose, because if it did, then maybe companies would just stop, who would do 90% of the jobs. So what are those mechanisms that actually, for anyone who's out there, that's perhaps struggling as well because they know that one day they want to do something, But how do people keep their head above water? How do they stay engaged? How do leaders keep their people engaged?
I think that's a really nice point you've just made. A person that knows in the future they want to do something has already got that self-awareness. So they're already on the first step to doing great things. And we all get hit by life, don't we? Mm-hmm. It's human nature, but it's having that awareness that you're not alone. Everyone else is struggling, just everybody doesn't vocalize it to each other. And that's why open communication is so important. If you go down and have a donut and a coffee downstairs cafe, for sure there's 5 other people having a bad day. But unless you talk to each other and say, oh, actually, yeah, I feel exactly the same, you're never going to know, and you'll go back to your place of work equally as miserable without any enlightenment. So I think those conversations are really important to, first of all, open up your eyes and realise it's not just you struggling. Secondly, to say, yes, I have got a plan. Okay, it's not going to materialise now, but in the future, I know what I want to do. And then the most you can do when things are bad is take responsibility for your own actions. So you might be in a job that doesn't inspire you and you don't like. I mean, once I went to Italy thinking I was going to start a business the next day, and I got there and I didn't speak Italian. So I ended up working in a bar, washing dishes for a season. But I don't think those dishes were ever so well washed as when I did it. So whatever you're doing, just do it well. Do it to the best of your ability, and I think that in itself empowers you.
Talking about future plans, I mean, you guys have been super generous with your time. Just give me a little bit of insight, and our audience a little bit of insight, because you're out here in the UAE, and I know you're off to Saudi tomorrow. What are your future plans? And tell me about World Extreme Medicine. Tell me about what's coming down the tracks for you guys. What's exciting you for 2024?
Well, being here in the UAE is an amazing opportunity for us, and we're grateful for being invited by the Department of Trade. It's, this is such an incredible hub of creativity and opportunity. I have to say, we do feel very fortunate to be here. Now, World Extreme Medicine works to break down silos between medical knowledge, so that the people responding to sudden onset disasters, to conflict, and working on expeditions clinically have the best set of skills they can possibly have, but also mentally are prepared for what they're going into, because it's a two-way thing. You can have the clinical skills and struggle, so it's about preparing them and making them aware of the environments they're going into. One of my, if I could manifest my intention, would be to bring the World Extreme Medicine Conference here to kind of open the doors to people's minds to the opportunities and what can be achieved, but also to build perhaps the world's foremost centre for extreme medicine training in terms of having environmental training for disaster teams, for endurance sports teams, for athletes who want to run up Everest, etc., etc. So, the UAE strikes me as being the perfect environment, both culturally, both in creativity and geographically. So that would be my aspiration for being here.
Having started a business in the UAE about mental health, I'm a massive believer in manifestation and your ability to kind of achieve that make that manifestation real. I'm a 100% believer of that here in this region.
Manifestation goes hand in hand with intention. Unless you have intention, you're never going to take the first step. So, moving here is our first step.
Nikki?
I like that word, to manifest something, and I think in order to do that, on the flip side with non-medics, the general population, I'm quite passionate about empowering the future leaders. So Mark and I've set up a couple of really nice courses here that we can take into schools, colleges, universities, that are all underpinned by all this beautiful science and medicine hidden in journals that nobody ever reads. So we've got these lovely ready-made to-go courses specifically for the 11-year-old upwards that really go to start them on their journey to leadership.
And with support of some of my astronaut friends at NASA, we also got a space cadet experience, which takes some of their learnings and ties that together with sort of our expedition experience to I love teaching kids because they're just so enthusiastic about life. And some of their questions, if there's space and dinosaurs, that's what, some of the questions that come out, you really, really do have to think about. But, with the Sport Mastermind Fund, we've got so much sort of material they've given us to present to the students and stuff. So we're really looking forward to the next few courses that we're going to be running.
Amazing. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you both today. Mark, Nikki, thank you for joining us on The Mental Space.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
And guys, if you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, please remember you can subscribe, follow us on all the podcast channels. If you're watching us on YouTube, click subscribe and we get many more of these conversations. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.